Good morning, just about everyone. Welcome back to the second session of the day. We have the Mark Bailey, that hopefully is familiar to most of us. And if he's not, Mark was graduated a long time ago, not quite as long as I did, from Salford with the electroacoustics degree. And he's spent all of the time I've known him, a very, very successful system designer and commercial leader, both at Harman and QSC, now independent. He's got some real-world experience he's going to bring to this, and he's going to talk to us about specifications, truth and lies, or is it two truths and a lie? That game, I can't remember if it's that one, but that's as much as I've got. So, and we've got the whole hour here, so we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, great to be here. This is actually only my second time at the conference, I really liked it so much. Not only did I come again, I decided to present, and I'm on the committee somehow. How did that happen? I don't know. I'm curious of one thing, because I think this venue's amazing. But you've been here for a while, and I know I'm off script here. But can I just have a show of hands? Who really likes this venue? Okay, well, I guess you're here, so you're a self, it's not the greatest survey, but yeah, interesting, because I think it's amazing. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about. Now, at some point, I'm sure we've all heard commentary about, well, XYZ manufacturer, they always, they exaggerate their claims and how dreadful that is. But of course, the manufacturer I represent, we're always very conservative with our claims. Of course we are, yes, okay, fine. So we've heard this. And we want to know what the right answer is. Now, I'm not going to try and poke too many holes here. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. Just a little bit about me, and I just had a very nice intro there from Paul. Sorry to say I'm not going to solve the world today. The world's a complicated place, and I'm not even going to fix the world of specifications, so I'm just going to set my expectations fairly low. I do happen to care about the environment, so one of the things that, as well as what I do, is that I do try to take an approach to sustainability at some of the work that I've been looking at recently, so that's of personal interest, and also diversity. So on the Institutes of Acoustics Committee, I'm responsible for encouraging diversity, and I recognise I'm generally talking to, a bunch of white guys, middle-aged white guys, and as I often say, some of my best friends are middle-aged white guys, so that's okay. Anyway, I'm not talking about that either. What I'm going to talk about is, I'm sure you've seen some of these questions, and the question is, will it go down to 60 hertz? Can it achieve a certain SPL, and so on? And the reality is, to all of these questions, and I know there are many more, is it depends. That's really the challenge. Before we come on to this, let's consider why does this matter, and let's sort of zoom out from Pro AV for a moment. People like to know what they're getting for a variety of reasons, and an increasing desire for people to know what they're eating, so your traffic light system or whatever it might be, the ingredients. And in fact, I was amused recently to see and positively amused, that Marks & Spencer, 5 ingredients only on some bread, and they list what they are. And I thought that's wonderful. I did think that there might be a challenge, but is that per roll, per serving, per pack? And I'm sure we can look and find this stuff out. But just to make the point that, what looks immediately simple sometimes isn't. Now, this is food, which is essential. We can't live without it, right? But, as somebody famous almost once said, some people believe that professional AV is a matter of life and death, but I can assure you it's much, much more important than that. Now, I'm paraphrasing Bill Shankly, the Liverpool manager, who said the same thing about football. I quite like the quote. And many of us in this room, I'm sure, are equally passionate about Pro AV as he was about football and about Liverpool. But the thing is, in our world, it really can be a matter of life and death, depending on, is that system loud enough for an evacuation? Is the speaker going to fall on someone's head because it's not suspended correctly? So, although, we might feel it from a passion, there are some real-world examples. And, of course, Hillsborough, ironically, led to some of the regulations that have caused us to install sound systems. It's not just AV and food. Just to give you another example, let's just say that I like watch. I do like watches, it happens. I think I'm wearing 2 at the moment. That's how much I like them. But let's say I've got a watch and it says it's water resistant to 30 metres. Okay? That's pretty good. Now, let's imagine I'm not that fit. I went for a run this morning, which I feel pretty good about. I just thought I'd drop that in the conversation. I don't think I could scuba dive to 25 metres. But let's just imagine for a moment that I could. And let's say 25, because I don't have 5 metre long arms. Therefore, you know, that should be safe, right? What do we think? Anyone comment? No, not safe. Anyone think it would be safe, 25 metres? One? Anyone else? I should ask this the other way around, because I know people, I'm not going to put my hand up. So if I say, who thinks it's safe? No, who thinks that? Oh, I'm stop. Yeah, otherwise I just asked that. So let's consider what the manufacturer says. So Timex, fine manufacturer. I've picked them at random. You know, I'm not supporting any of these in particular. What do we think then for Timex? Does anyone want to give me a suggestion of what, if they say 30 metres, what does it actually mean?
Is that water resistant or waterproof?
Let's say it's waterproof.
How long for?
What do you think it means? What practically can you do? Can I? Well, nobody said that we could dive to 25 metres. So okay, room general consensus is we can't dive to 25 metres. What do we think we can do? Anyone? Just give me an answer. Somebody.
Go for a swim wearing it.
Go for a swim. Okay.
Go for a
shower. Okay. Anyone else? Thanks for the interaction. Appreciate it. Well, the answer is apparently you can wash your hands. Kind of a difficult. But what about 50 metres? You often see that on a watch. Well, that means you could do some light swimming with your watch at 50 metres. Okay, but in fact, if you wanted to do some scuba diving, then you need a 100 or 200 metre watch. That feels wrong. But what I would say is that actually the reason behind this, as I understand it, I'm not doing watch specs, but essentially, this is to do with the pressure. If you were to lower the watch really, 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 really carefully, infinitesimally slowly, you could get to 30 metres. The challenge is, as soon as you move it, you increase the pressure, and that's the problem. So that's why these specs are out. So it's not a lie, it's different. But if we take Amiga, on the other hand, they take a different approach. They say, if it's 30 metres, you can swim to 30 metres. I mean, that's, you know, it's cool. Now, you could argue that they're doing themselves a disservice, but they choose to be, we're going to be strong, we're conservative with our specs. They're taking that approach. For what it's worth, Apple follow the Timex approach, so do TAG, which is a fairly high-end watch, and Rolex don't tell you. Well, at least I couldn't find it. Again, it's not a deep research, but they tend to only do watches that are 100 or 200 metres. So I guess they're less likely to get the complaint than the likes of Apple or multi-users that will use this. So there is a relation to this I'll now come back into our world. This is the same thing with suspension. We know that a load is not static, and so as a result, you can't just say if I need to suspend 1,000 kilos that my load can take 1,000 kilos. So we know that generally manufacturers will give a rating. And this is, and thank you to these manufacturers, I'll come on to who I surveyed, but this, just to dip us into the data for a moment, is what they say. So there are different load ratings. Martin chose to offer as a spec, but it's 5 to 10 to 1. And this gives you an idea of how it ties into our world. Let's just go back again to pressure, because I thought this was fun before I leave the world of watches and water altogether. This is something I'm sure you've seen in many cases. What do these dB things mean? And so I've got a little question. So I'll put some reference on here. If 140 dB, which is, jet engine side of runway, 200 pascals, what's the equivalent water depth? Any guesses? Someone want to tell me? 10 centimetres. 20, okay. Anyone else? 5 metres. Okay, I'm not going to push the room on this, going twice. Apparently it's 2 centimetres, which is kind of interesting. And thank you to, so to be fair, I consulted AI on this, and then I think I need actual eye. So I spoke with Jamie last night, well, it could still be AI. But yeah, I mean, we can go through this, but roughly atmospheric pressure is 100,000 pascals, and 10 metres is double an atmospheric pressure. So it kind of feels about right, but it's interesting. It's interesting just to remember that in our life or death world of AV, the audio, but God, it's small. I mean, 1 watt of acoustic energy, which is up here, is 110 dB, if it was all acoustic energy. I mean, it's 109 or 112, depending on whether it's half space or full space, but let's call it 110 for good measure. And so 200 would be 1,000 watts, yes? We're not talking about much power. And this also is we're a bunch of delicate flowers in a life and death industry. So there we go. And if ever you wonder why acoustic calibrators are 94 dB, generally it's because it's 1 Pascal. So more bit of exciting trivia for you. Told you this is riveting stuff. So these are the manufacturers that I surveyed, all high quality, well reputed manufacturers. I know there are others, and I do plan to continue this work. So if you represent someone that's not on this list, this is by no means a closed shop. I'm very interested to get your information in as well, because I certainly have a way I would like to move forward with this. What I asked was basically, I won't go through what's on there, but I had a very simple list. It was some drop downs, so you could say either from what I figured were likely answers, but equally there were some notes if you wanted to give some detail, or if what I'd written didn't cover it somehow. Now, of those that replied, these are the ones that are not greyed out actually came back to me. So this is where I've based a lot of the data. D&B, interestingly, and I'll come back to this, they responded, but they didn't want to be part of the survey. In a sense, they are the direct line, not available on comparison sites, I guess, for this example. Again, great manufacturer, and they've got some logic behind what they were saying, but they did respond. We had some dialogue, but they're not part of the numbers. So, and the fastest response was Coda. They got back to me within an afternoon, so I thought that was pretty cool. Well done, Robin Dibble. Got to give him a shout for that. And I think actually Gareth got back to me within pretty short order as well, so hats off there. Anyway, so this is a long-standing curiosity for me. Back in 1997, I created something which I called, very humorously, of course, the Pitch Spiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because I'm an extreme Douglas Adams nerd, and I like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I thought, what fun. But basically, I had a series of questions in my role as a technical support engineer for a manufacturer, and I repeatedly got the same things. I thought, why don't I try and contain this into some sort of short document to help answer some of the questions. I mean, there were some things like, the most common question was, how many watts is it? It seemed to be the obsessive, but how many watts is it? And are those real watts? Whatever that means. I had someone come in to me and say, I'm doing a car SPL competition. I don't care what it sounds like. I just want to make as much noise as I possibly can, because that's what wins me the competition. So I thought, well, okay, we've got this mid-range horn, and it's, I don't remember, but maybe it was 116 dB, 1 watt, 1 meter, and we had a 200 watt compression drive, and I thought, that's going to be loud. It's like with 130 dB, whatever, theoretically. And I suggested to the guy, and he said, how many watts is it? I said, it's 200. He said, oh, well, I've already got 2,000 in my car. I said, yes, but look how loud this will be. And he said, so this is like putting 200 watts in and getting 2,000 out. No, not quite, but yes, in a way. So the thing that bothered me about this as well, in a similar line, and this goes back even further, this was when I was doing A-level physics. In our sixth form common room, we had one of these joyous devices, a twin cassette recorder, and emblazoned with 60 watts of PMPO, peak music power output, or something like that. The thing that bothered me was that on the back it said it only used 22 watts. And I kind of thought, I knew a little bit about Pro PA at the time, but it felt wrong. And, you know, as Scotty would say, you canny change the laws of physics. Or I think it was the Firm in their Star Trekking song. But anyway, I'm sure he said it too. Now, physics still applies, so we have to remember this. Put some formulas up here. As some of you may know, in the UK, we recently changed the requirement so you can have your formula sheet in your, I think it's maths or physics test, I can't remember now. But anyway, so there's nothing wrong with having the formulas in front of us, that's a good thing. So we've got Ohm's law, we can calculate power, all of this. And, you know, there's one important thing, as Homer Simpson said, come on. Oh, no! I can't believe, what's gone wrong? Is that my fault? I sound checked this twice.
In this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics.
Yes. This is when Lisa Simpson creates a perpetual motion machine, and it bothers Homer intellectually, so he says this. It's very funny. But it's true, we should consider this. Now, I want to start with power, and power can be important or not. And there's some interesting claims. I've decided just to go to Amazon and the internet. The internet knows everything. Unfortunately, the one that's at 10,000 watts Bluetooth is no longer available on Amazon. You can go further afield to India, and you can still get your 10,000 watt portable. It's got lights on as well. I mean, so I think, you know, I'm sorry, manufacturers in the room, we're done. So let's start with power. So we have all of these different ratings. We've got, you know, RMS, AES, continuous power. I'm not going to read them all out. And it can be pretty confusing to consider what they might be. What are we measuring? Now, if we were to just try and look on the internet and try and get some information here, we don't necessarily get some great answers. I'm not going to read through this. One thing that bothers me in particular is that RMS defines good sound quality, which I'm pretty sure no one is possibly going to think that. It made me think if AI is coming for our jobs, I don't think they're going to be sound engineers anytime soon. This guy, though, I think I would employ in a sales role. I think he'd be great. Anyone want to take the order? Yes, he will help you. Yeah, so we've got some work to do. Now, thankfully, thank goodness for BBC, they will at least give us some nice RMS if we dig into that bit for a moment, because a lot of people are keen on RMS, and certainly in some cases, particularly like power output of amplifiers, it can be a very relevant spec. BBC Bite Size, very nice. What's RMS anyway? Well, in sine wave terms, it's just the equivalent voltage that would be the same as if it was a DC source. And I guess that's obvious, and sorry if I'm saying obvious things, but I thought, you know, so I'd remembered that. That's nice. There's a nice little AC-DC link up there. And I thought, okay, so that's what RMS is all about. But first of all, I don't know about you, but I don't tend to listen to sine waves very often. It's not my chosen thing. So we've got to consider what are we listening to and what's it representative of. So a lot of people will use noise as a noise signal. Taken this directly from the reference at the bottom on this, so trying to reference stuff. B&C, so this is a driver manufacturer that supplies many pro audio manufacturers, and they're talking about the AES2 1984 standard. It's rocking now, isn't it? Exciting stuff. But basically, it's pink noise, so it's a defined signal, a defined test duration, and a defined bandwidth. So that's all pretty good. 6 dB crest factor or peak to average, so that's also a defined thing. Also on their site, they make the point that increasingly manufacturers look at a 12 dB crest factor because that more accurately reflects music. And again, it's a choice. It's not right or wrong, but there's a difference here. The thing is it important? Does this mean anything? You know, aren't we really more interested at the end of the day in what comes out of the loudspeaker? Of course we are. In theory, we can look at the max SPL as being a combination of the sensitivity plus the power handling, or a log of the power handling. So we can calculate this stuff. Sensitivity is 1 watt 1 meter is the way we think about it. Sometimes it tends to be 2.83 volts at 8 ohms or 2 volts at 4 ohms, which is not necessarily 1 watt, but, you know, let's park that for a moment. But, you know, so it's essentially that. And here we come to a stadium design. This is a real-world example that I worked on many, many years ago, safe enough to be past whatever the point is where you get, told off for doing stuff. I don't know. Anyway, and it was successful in the end. But we were looking to design a sound system. We were very close on the specification. It's actually the Emirates Stadium. I was looking for a picture of me on the roof of it, which I've got somewhere, but I couldn't find it. But very nice detailed spec sheet, so there's a lot in there. And also, crucially, and I would encourage you to look at this if you're looking at manufacturers, what's the footnote? One of the things I think it says in here is AES standard. Yeah, that's not, with full respect, the best now, but it kind of tells you something. It's like, which AES standard? Another matter. But to be fair, this is a well-qualified data sheet. And from that, I started to look, is in my role, and I said, okay, we've got 96 dB, 1 watt 1 meter, free field, 4 ohms, 1200 watts power, so that's going to give us an extra 31 dB. That should give us 127. In theory, that should give us enough room to, take the distance into account. That would get us what we need. There was something to take into account, which was power compression, which used to be talked about by some manufacturers a lot, now isn't, for interesting reasons. I'll park that also, but that's basically how speakers become less efficient as you drive them harder for a variety of reasons. But I knew I had some hidden info that wasn't on the data sheet that we could account for about 3.9 dB, so we built that into the spec, and then the consultant, awkwardly, bloody consultants, they still didn't believe me, and we had to test it. So we thought, well, okay, we've picked noise, we know it's a 6 dB crest factor, we can do the calculation of the voltage, and we do 69 volts into there because we've done the calculation. Everyone think this is okay? Anyone think this is not okay? See, I've asked a question where someone's had to raise their hand now. Ooh. No, so we all think it's okay, it seems reasonable. Partway through the test, and we were measuring sort of pretty much what we expected, the speaker stopped working. It's not okay then. And I called up the engineering department. I said, well, I don't understand. We're following the data. We've taken this into account. And we put, 69 volts. I said, you've done what? So we put 69 volts. It's only rated for, I can't remember the exact number now. But basically, AES 1984 Part 2, exciting, meant that the power was rated on the minimum impedance, which was 3.4 ohms. So although the sensitivity was rated on the nominal impedance, the power was on the minimum impedance, and there was a disconnect. So it was an extra thing, despite a very detailed spec sheet, and no criticism to the manufacturer here, great detailed spec sheet, loads of bullet points and caveats, still got it wrong. And so that's key. So it was 15% more, and the thing burnt. Sad. Impedance, I'll just touch on this, just to remember, resistance, impedance is like resistance at different frequencies, and of course you've got to make a choice because it isn't a flat line. So this is a speaker that would be judged as being 8 ohms. This is from drproaudio.com, by the way, just to give credit. Nice guy, I don't know if you know him, but it's a nice website. It looks a bit clunky, basic, but there's some fantastic information on there. This is not a commercial plug, just a guy I know. Good guy. Anyway, so we'll come back to this crest factor thing. So 12 dB crest factor mentions what a lot of manufacturers start to do. Why? Well, if you look at AES 2 2012, enter a new standard, a revision, that's what they're using, and they're using that because it arguably more accurately represents music. So we've got different music types and some measurements as a result of that on that standard. So that makes sense. Okay, we've got a higher crest factor, but it's representing music, so on. And back to our survey said, most manufacturers now are using AES 2 2012, or some variation of it. Again, look at the data. The IEC one from Bose is, it's more relevant for a system. So an AES is for a driver, an IEC is for a whole system. So you can base your test on the AES one and state how you do it, or there is an IEC test which is pretty similar. The IEC test, though, does go for 100 hours, and the standard AES one only goes for 2 hours, so fun. Mayer didn't quote because they've got a powered system. What's the point in telling you what the power is? More about what comes out. Next, I have a voltage part, which, again, as I mentioned, voltage is what goes into the speaker, so that's a pretty reasonable thing. It avoids any confusion. Different, if you want to have a quick look through, again, I'll shout out to Dr. Pro PA, they'll give you a little guide on what the spectrums are and so on. But let's just come back to the loudspeaker system spec. So we've got the sensitivity, the crest factor, duration, because that's key. You know, if someone said, oh, it's 1,000 watts. Yes, for how long? Ooh, not very. You know we want our speaker to last a period of time. But then we come on to sort of, you know, what does it sound like? Because all this loud stuff, you know, back to my car audio guy, great, but yeah, probably we'll want to listen to not a sine wave and to something musical. So frequency response and distortion. Frequency response, nice linear response here. Does it go down to 20 hertz? Well, it kind of depends how you call it. But this would be a studio monitor. How much do we accept as a variation? Again, there's actually pretty good consistency across manufacturers here. Arguably, plus and minus 3 is kind of the same as minus 6. If you go 0 to minus 6, it's still possibly the same range. Minus 3 arguably is a little tighter, and so on. I won't read out all of these here. But we can see that the manufacturer, when they're saying X to Y on the frequency spectrum, they're giving some boundaries. You can see what they are typically, and there we go. What about distortion? Interestingly, loudspeaker distortion is not something that manufacturers came back with. Both Function One and Mayer did say that they were working on it, which is interesting. So I'm curious to see what they come up with. But essentially, on the loudspeaker side, this is not a quantity we see. On the amplifiers, however, yes, it is. So we have different, these are dedicated amplifier manufacturers. I know that I'll come back to the fact that some speaker manufacturers make their own amps, but dedicated amp manufacturers, 0.1%, 1%, but is it full power and how are you doing the test and so on. But the linear research references a standard. Actually, I think PowerSoft also do the same standard, if I remember, a variation on it. Yes, and we've got here. So this is then the tests that are driven. So it's LEA are doing a sine wave sweep. The other two tests are a single sine wave, so you can argue, well, you're only doing a single sine wave, but okay, theirs lasts for 5 seconds. The LEA one only lasts for 2. Okay, but they're all good. They're all good stuff. But then it's like, well, what do you need to put in? So there's how much power am I going to draw from the wall? Is my 16 amp going to be sufficient? Well, that's an interesting challenge. So, but this comes back to, again, what do we really need in our delicate world? A third or an eighth power are typically what's quoted. Why? Well, this is something I actually took off the QSC website for one of their, they don't make it anymore, but they had for one of their old power amplifiers when they did those things, which were very nice. And really an eighth power is clipped music just going into clip. Third power is heavily clipped, and per their point, full power is basically a lab test. You know, so when we're looking again back to our, you know, do we need 22 watts to go in order for 60 watts to come out in that stereo? Maybe it's starting to look not so ridiculous anymore, but it probably still was. That's another matter. Again, as I mentioned, there are amplifiers made by speaker companies, so we've got some data here from all of them. Pretty much the distortion figures for the electronics are very small. All of the distortion pretty much happens at the end, so it does rather depend on if it's a full power test or not. But you know, clearly we can see that there are differences between these. Subwoofer example. So this is, and forgive, I'm sure that AI knows that the chains are safe and has done all the necessary tests and so on. It's just, you know, it's fine. But that important difference between, is it a full space measurement for the subwoofer sensitivity or a ground plane measurement? When I worked for a particular manufacturer, I was quite interested that we brought out a lower cost subwoofer that had 6 dB more sensitivity than the higher cost one with exactly the same driver in the same size box. And I thought, what's this going on? What's going on here? And the thing is, the cheaper box could not be suspended. It could only be put on the floor. So the decision was, well, we'll rate this one as though it's flown and this one on the floor, which was great, but it confused everyone. So just to make that point, we've got, if you put it on the floor, you're going to get sort of 6 dB more out of your speaker, which is, you know, 4 times as much power. So it's significant, right? And if we look at how manufacturers are doing this, everyone I surveyed is now measuring their subs in 2 pi space. So it's just something to be aware of if you're specifying something. Now, subs are the things that have the biggest power compression, the biggest sensitivity to higher power. So, but this is the numbers you get here will be 6 dB higher than in the air for a single unit. There's an interesting point here that if you are looking at an ease model and you're looking at a direct field, basically a direct field, and I realise subs are not, for the older version of ease, it's not typical, but certainly not typically useful because it doesn't go down that low. But basically, if you put the sub in direct field next to the boundary on the floor, it makes no difference. So you're always measuring this 2 pi as though it's on the floor, even if you put it in the air. It's just something to bear in mind if you do this stuff. And one other thing that I spoke to my friend Bruce, and he just reminded me that all the manufacturer data is the loudspeaker manufacturer's responsibility. So just because it's in ease doesn't mean it's proved or proven. It's a translation of the spec sheet. And that's actually going to be one of my next bits of work with this following on. Come back to full range maximum SPL, because again, it's what we're interested in, what comes out. And most calculate it. So they did what I said before. They do a combination of the sensitivity and the power. There are some that measure. Now, interestingly, there's a slight difference here because Nexo are measuring, but doing peak only. So it's a real measurement, which, there's some credence to that. Coda likewise doing, they are quoting 12 dB crest factor. I don't know what the crest factor is for Nexo in this case. I think it will be 6. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And on the other side, function 1 will say, well, we're not going to give a peak figure because we think it's silly. My words, not exactly theirs. But basically, they're saying, let's deal with what they would perceive to be more real-world numbers. And then Mayer take a step further and say, well, we're doing AES 75. Oh, God. Now, this is for very good reason, because they've argued the point, and it was originally called M-noise, that the shape of pink noise doesn't represent the music. So we've said, okay, it's a signal that we can compare one thing for another, but shouldn't we more accurately represent, what we're actually listening to? This is from, again, snippet from the AES 75 paper, and it's showing that, okay, the music noise, as it's called on here, is a different slope, different spectrum, so arguably fairer. If we come back to, also I mentioned DNB at the beginning, they didn't want to be part of the comparison, fair enough, I fully respect that. But basically when I said, okay, when you want to know what it is, you want to use their software. Now they have some really clever software, as I understand it, that basically you put in the exact signal that you want into their prediction, and whether it's speech or music or whatever, then their prediction software tells you what you're going to get out of it. So that's pretty cool. Challenge is you can't compare it with anything else. They said, you can compare this in ease. Okay, perhaps, so fair play, but both Mayer and DNB in this case are trying to make it more real, a bit like the Amiga watch of you can really swim to 30 meters in this, but it becomes harder to compare if you're looking for, well, should I spend more money on this system to get more output or whatever. And another thing I wanted to mention is that, and I haven't gone into this in detail, but most speaker manufacturers have some form of EQ, and depending on if they've done a calculated setting, have they taken that into account or not? That could vary things, but there are so many other factors as I've discussed. But I did want to make the point that Function 1 and KV2 both make a thing of no DSP. So they say, look, we design the speaker, you don't have any DSP. So when you look at a calculated setting from them, you at least can understand, well, there's no DSP to consider, no boosts in the bass or anything else. Ironically, Martin Audio take the other approach and say not all equalization is equal and ours is better. I mean, I appreciate that that's a subjective matter, that they'll, you could talk to a representative of them and they'll tell you why they would say that, but interesting differences. What have we got onto here? Right. So, we need to know what's reasonable, and we just need to know really how to check. If we're working with something, you know, all of those manufacturers are good. If we're working with something that's unbranded, then we can be a bit more careful. I think that for those of us that represent in this room, or those of you that represent in this room sort of a decent manufacturer, let's say reputable manufacturer, it's good to know these are the reasons why you should be able to stand behind what your supplier is saying or what you're saying. And also if you're talking to a customer, you know, hopefully there's some tools in here to help you say, well, yeah, that might say 10,000 watts, but probably it isn't, or at least not in a useful way for these reasons. I want to, you know, as it's truth or lie, I want to thank these particular manufacturers for sharing the truth, in the sense that they've given me some qualified answers. And I think that when we're dealing with these manufacturers here, truth or lie, it's probably not the right question. It's more like, well, what do you mean by that? How did you get to that number? So, you know, we want to be able to compare one thing with another. You know, many are correct. The peak SPL could be measured, blah, blah, blah. And it often comes from the missing qualifications. I more or less just said that. Final thing, listen. I really think it's, you know, it's listen, experience the system. That's key. Because, you know, people say to me sometimes, oh, you work in audio, what's the best hi-fi? What should I get? I said, well, listen to stuff. You know, go and set a budget, go and listen. If you like it, that's probably the right one for you. I realise in our world it's a bit more complicated, but, you know, I would really say, you know, you can talk as much about the specs as you like, but really what you want to do is experience it. And that sometimes is the thing that will change your mind, change the customer's mind, and we tend to be fairly conservative in our industry. I did wonder if someone had actually invented the wheel for the first time. I expect there'd be still people that say, no, we actually prefer carrying heavy equipment in and out of trucks. I said, no, you don't want the wheel to go. You know, you've got to show this. I'm reusing stuff here, but I like it. So, yeah, thank you to these for the dialogue. Really appreciate that. And the thing that I just wanted to end with is that in terms of the experience, shout out to the people who are represented here. So you've actually got in the room over there, you can't experience the equipment necessarily, but you can talk to representatives of the kit. You know, and there are various demo things that all of the manufacturers do. If you want to see, calling out Callum, he can even switch on a party light. That's exciting. That's something else. Martin Audio have got demo days next week. You know, there's plenty of ways that you can actually experience and then talk to the manufacturer, understand what's being said. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. And that gives us 20 minutes, up to 20 minutes only for any questions. Do we have any from the floor? Yes, we have one in the front here. My glasses on to actually see who you are.
Thanks for that, Mark. That was very good fun. Having been involved myself with a manufacturer in a previous life, helping to update some of the rather erroneous specifications, one thing I wondered, with your questionnaire, did they give any indication of whether they were in-house measurements or whether they were using third-party independent measuring?
I didn't put that as an excellent question. I didn't put that on the sheet. My feeling was, and to be clear and to be fair to everyone involved, I took their answers as their answers. I'm not, trying to say, well, okay, you've said that, but I think it's wrong. That's what's stated. And to me, if someone's stating a particular specification, realistically, whether they do it or whether someone else does it, if they've really done the spec, it shouldn't matter. But it's a fair question. Maybe as I move forward with this, as I intend to, I should add that into the question.
Has your experience been that that's a relevant factor?
I think it just sometimes gives a bit of credence to go, well, look, we have had someone independently verify this.
And the principle, well, you've actually found, to your belief, a difference in the result according to whether they did it themselves. Okay. Without being too direct, that's a Thank you. Any others? Over there.
Thank you for that. I have a question about the use of the information? Because now you have a big data set of interesting data from manufacturers. What's the next step? What are you going to do with the data? Other than, like, after, now that we have learned about all of this, what's the next step for you?
So I think the next step for me, thank you for the question, I think the next step for me, I think, is to look at the ease data, because I think that that's something that, again, I haven't tied up. If we're saying this much sound pressure, is that really what we would get? That's the next logical thing for me. I want to be careful that I'm not seen to push a manufacturer and make them appear in a bad light. That's certainly not the goal of any of this. So I don't know that I would want to be very careful about, let's say, publishing something in that regard. I've obviously shared this, so, whether you've taken a picture of it now, this is effectively public information, but also it's nothing you can't go and look on that manufacturer to see. Perhaps to put it back to you, what would you like to see come out of it? If you don't know, you can tell me afterwards. That's fine.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a...
No, fair enough. But at the moment, my feeling is that the next step is to dig a bit deeper into the ease data, because I think certainly also in ease are updating their ability to measure in low frequencies as well. So that also makes it relevant, I think, for these more complicated designs. I mean, I think there's two things here. One is I'd like to be able to compare apples for apples, because it's more or less, let's say, respectfully, I'm designing a nightclub, so I want it loud, but how loud is perhaps not so easily defined. I just want to know, well, am I paying more for this, and is it louder than that, really? A life safety situation is an entirely different thing. If we've got to achieve to meet the standard 95 dB across this range, whatever, then, and that's when I think your acoustic modelling comes in, and that's where the ease data becomes key.
Thank you so much.
Do you think, Mark, that we've talked a bit about the robustness of the data, and do you think that's a brand choice?
I think in some cases it is, and I think you see, one of the things I forgot to mention about Mayer is that they're frustrated in the sense that they are the ones using it. They want more people to use AES 75 to have an apples for apples. They think that's the most realistic or most reasonable, real, whatever we call it, spec. But if only they use it, they look worse. So they also publish a burst spec, to try and be apples for apples from what they perceive against other manufacturers. So for sure there are choices, and I heard anecdotally that there are some manufacturers who don't want to use AES 75 simply because the numbers don't look good. Yeah. Simple as that.
Yeah, so I meant that, but I also meant that some brands, when they claim to do something, you can feel confident the product will do that and maybe a bit more they've not admitted to. As other brands, what they claim to do, if it'll do it for a very short amount of time or only just and in very specific circumstances. And different brands, different approaches are appropriate to different brands.
Yeah, and I think certainly that those brands, respectfully, that would say RMS for their speaker data, I mean, we just don't know. That's the thing. It's not that we can say, well, that's bad. I mean, okay, if I was competing against it, I'd probably say that's bad. Mine's real or whatever. Yeah. But there'll be a lot of speakers that are rated with an RMS rating that keep going and are absolutely fine. But it's just realistically you don't know. And I think, as a manufacturer, you've got to, how much time do you spend? So if you take, I think the AES first, the 1984 is also based on the driver in free field, and you put it in the box and it changes. Yeah. The voice coil gets to like 200 Celsius or something when it's running, and the box inside can get, I think, 70. So it gets still pretty warm. So there is a clear difference in how that voice coil will cool in 70 versus 20. How many manufacturers take that into account? Not all, just to be open. And also, it's an R&D cost, isn't it? Right, okay, we've verified this driver, or even we've bought this driver from a known manufacturer, and they've said it's 150 watts to AES or to whatever, let's say they've qualified it. Well, we put it in a box. Are we going to retest it? It's resource. So, I think it's the choice. In some cases, it is a choice from that manufacturer. It depends on how important it is to them.
Exactly, yeah. All these hidden, whatever system you put in, there's going to be hidden nuances that could add up to something significant. Yeah. And if you are the R&D department of a speaker manufacturer, then you kind of know that better than anyone else, which of those you choose to take into account in qualifying or making your spec robust is a choice. And therefore, from the outside, we have to assume those brands that are reliant on the reputation of the end product are going the extra miles to make sure that what they tell us is representative, whereas those who just want to shift the boxes, to be cruel about it, we might take everything with more of a pinch of salt. That's what I mean by a brand choice. And either approach is fine, because those different ends of the spectrum I've described are in the market for different reasons. And that's fine, but obviously it's the sliding scale between the two that we're constantly trying to judge, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Do we have a question in the back? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick one for me. Just picking up on a few nuggets of information that were in the previous question, which have prompted mine. But I'm mindful some manufacturers only kind of stick by their data if it's tested with a specific amplifier that they partner with. So I'm just wondering if going forward there might be a way of retesting all of these with a uniform, kind of a consistent front-end amplifier, basically, that would kind of make it more comparable apples for apples, so to speak.
Absolutely, I think that's an excellent point, and I mean certain manufacturers will not guarantee their speakers. I mean, one of the questions on there which I didn't dive into was warranty, and some will not warranty their speaker if you don't use their amplifier, for example. Some are intrinsically linked together that you just okay, you can always connect something, but effectively you don't have an option. You have to use that. Others, it depends. I think like L Acoustics and D&B, it's a closed system. May is obviously a closed system because it's all in one. I think Nexo is all in. You have to use the amp. JBL will do. You can use their amp, or you do have to for some system. Martin do the same thing. There's a variety of different options, but look, for sure the amp choice is key, because if the amp, this is another thing from perhaps less prevalent now, but people think, well, okay, I've got a 150 watt amp, I can't blow up my 150 watt speaker. Wrong, and so that's the system bit, which we increasingly move towards, makes a lot of sense, and in the end it does come back down to what are we getting out of it, because that's the key thing. I think I delved a bit into the amplifier part, particularly with those three, because they just do amps. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, if you are a power soft or an LEA, well, you have to sell on what you do as an amp.
Thank you. Thanks. Do we? Yep.
Yeah, hi, very interesting. And you just touched on, again there, the real result is what do we get at the end of the day? So is there any data that then gets fed back? So you've got the specification for your stadium. You've obviously picked your products and things based on that. Where's the feedback loop that's sort of saying, right, okay, and then we went at the end and actually it did or it didn't achieve what we were hoping to do because the calculations didn't reflect the real world testing. And I don't know where the evidence is there, or if there's much evidence from that end.
I think there's quite a, well, again, anecdotal. I can't say how scientific. There's a lot of anecdotal data I've heard from Martin, from D&B, from JBL, that say that at certain levels you can take their prediction software and you can say we're getting what we're predicting to within an acceptable amount as the system. That's with a closed system. Now, what I would say is that in those cases, I don't think from this is anecdotal evidence, let's say, I don't think this is ever from a pushed to a max situation. So to kind of come back to answering the question, I mean, to me, okay, in certain life safety situations, you have to have someone go around and verify and go, yes, I sign off the system. Then it will be measured. In my experience of all of the systems that I've designed or been involved with, the only time anyone, apart from life safety, goes back to check is if they don't like the result. Otherwise, they kind of go, well, is it loud? Yes, it's loud. I want it loud. Good. The one thing I didn't put in here, but I was tempted to, was the Iggy and the Stooges rider. I don't know if you've seen that. And it's like, I want power amplifiers, powerful enough to power a monster truck rally, and, great specs. And in the end, if you give someone like that they feel, okay, that's what I got, job done.
Mark, do you mind if
Please.
I actually do think that's a really critical.
Can we get the mic to you, if you don't mind? Thank you.
Right. In terms, I think it's a really important question, because how do you know your system delivers it in the real world should be a question asked by everybody that commissions a sound system in every single environment. I can only speak from Nexo's perspective on this, so I am biased. But Nexo's perspective is very simple. We will go and commission every single system that we are involved in designing at no cost to you as an installer or to the end user, wherever that is in the world. So when we did Perth Stadium in Australia, we flew a team of 4 engineers to Australia to do that commissioning. We will sit there, we will measure per the standard at every point we need to around that stadium. If our design doesn't work, we will rectify it at our cost. And I don't think that's an unfair thing to ask of every manufacturer. Because if you are buying systems based on their specifications, and I think talking to Mark's point about moving on to doing ease, I also think it'd be worth looking at standalone manufacturers' prediction software.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of scope there for, I once heard a sales director of a previous company I worked for say, couldn't he have one that he could do the colours himself on?
I like, yes.
And he could actually paint in the results. So I think to answer that question, you should be more challenging of the people doing your speaker designs and asking them to actually back up what they design, because I think that's critical for all manufacturers to do that, personally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And consultants, by the way, that design that system independently and charge you a lot of money for that design. Controversial, possibly.
Have any more?
Looks like we're done.
Then I think we should thank Mark for a stimulating conversation.